Bonjour, mes amis. Yeah, it's another session of .NET API review. We have a whole lot of red. There's a whole lot of stuff marked 9 that's not red. Hence, nine's almost over, so good luck. And then all the other stuff that we're not getting to. But yeah, so let's just see how they go. All right. Expose polymorphic base type in JSON schema exporter context 104046.
Right. I can speak to that, although there is a STJ issue that registers much higher in priority. So if you don't mind, would it be possible to skip that one in favor of the other STJ one? Should
Um,
have said that before, sorry.
I want to say no,
So,
but I don't care.
okay, so it's the let UTF-8 JSON reader process input with one complete, that one, yeah. Right. So
What's the proposal?
it links, so the top link links to the API proposal.
Mm.
So this is a long-standing issue. It's a long-known restriction of system text JSON, which many customers have requested. And now there is an AI angle, which makes us expedite things a bit more. So it's basically the ability for the UTF-8 JSON reader type to support multiple root level JSON documents. In this case, what multiple root level JSON documents means is having, well, basically multiple white space separated self-contained JSON values. So 1 space 1 space 1 is an example of a very simple sequence of self-contained JSON values. They might be object, they might be arrays, they might be arbitrary complex JSON documents. At the moment, the behavior of UTF-8 JSON reader is to throw an exception if it encounters any sort of content beyond the end of the first document that isn't white space, and that is not configurable. So this has been creating issues for many users that have been wanting to, stream basically multiple objects from the same stream. So this API proposal comes in two layers, as it were. So one, a flag that enables this behavior on the reader type and accompanying configuration objects. And I can go through some examples to show you how that works. But effectively, the key type is the JSON reader option struct, which exposes a new Boolean called allow trailing content, defaulting to false. And accompanying settings in the JSON serializer options class and the source generator attribute for compile time configuration. Now, if you could scroll down to the example, in case people are interested in the operational semantics of this, basically, you just feed your UTF-8 JSON reader with a sequence of white space separate documents, and you read as usual. But in this case, if you try to advance beyond the end of the final token in your first value, it continues reading almost as if you're reading an implicit root level array. And it finally returns false once you've done going through everything in the list. The idea here being that, of course, you can choose to ignore any trailing data that isn't valid JSON unless you explicitly try to kind of enumerate up to the end of the sequence. Like if you only want to lazily consume the initial tokens, you should be fine. But if you try to read towards the invalid JSON at the end, you'll get a JSON reader exception. This setting is also exposed on the JSON serializer options layer, which governs the behavior of JSON serializer. And in this case, it's the only impact that it has is that it basically allows any form of trailing data, which it ignores. So this is kind of the first part of the API proposal. There's another one coming up, but are there any questions or objections for what I've described so far?
Yeah, so my question is so the JSON serializer example that you gave is just passing in a string. So what happens when you pass in a stream? Can I call deserialize multiple times for each object in that stream? In other words, are you making sure that you only read as much from the stream until the first deserialization is complete, and then I can call it again and it just resumes?
So that I'll be getting to that. That requires dedicated API. But as far
Okay.
as the deserialize or deserialize async methods, the only impact that this new flag has is ignoring kind of any trailing data. That's kind of the modality of these methods. It's try to deserialize the first self-contained JSON value, ignore everything else.
So, but what happens with the stream? When you pass in the stream, is the stream then read all the way to the end, or?
No, it will be read up to the point where you reach the end of the current JSON document. So if the encoding medium is string, if the encoding medium is stream, if the encoding medium is read-only span of byte, it will have essentially the same behavior as what the example is showing you here with the string example.
But if it's stream, presumably JSON deserializer is not reading 1 byte at a time.
No.
So if it reads a kilobyte page, if this was in a stream, it will have read all of this, processed the first thing. The stream is now already at the end of the stream. You've lost this data.
Yeah, because of how stream works, we cannot guarantee that we won't be reading past the end of the document. The only thing that we can guarantee is that it will be not throwing an exception if it happens to encounter trailing data.
Right,
now,
so
for
the stream
scenario,
if you set this and call the stream overload, your stream is garbage.
Correct.
It's no different from today.
Well, today it reads the stream to the end.
It reads the stream to the end, throwing if non-white space
right.
data is
if it succeeded, it read the stream to the end, and if it failed, it read however much it read before it failed.
That's not true. It doesn't guarantee it reads the stream to the end in the case that it encounters an error halfway through.
Yeah, so it either, if it succeeds, it read the stream to the end, and if it throws with the stream having been read however much it was.
Right, but that's only because the end of the object is defined as the end of the stream.
Right.
This doesn't change that. It just means that it can end sooner.
Right, but you can't put this mode on to then call stream deserialize multiple times, because
not with this API. That's what the next API is for. Yeah.
Sure. Just Emo asked the question, and the answer was it'll only read up to the end of the object, but the answer is not. It'll read to wherever it reads to, and the stream is now unreliable.
Correct. Sure.
Yeah.
We could make it work if the stream is seekable. It's just not the majority use case.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could bake in a provision for that to kind of rewind the stream to a state if it is seekable. I mean, if that's desirable, I can make a note of it.
I think that'd be worthwhile to do.
Okay.
But I don't know that it makes a significant, it's kind of unless there's a significant reason why not to do that, we should just do it. It's kind of expected. But I don't know that it significantly moves the needle. You still need the latter set of overloads.
Yeah, I mean, I would think it would be surprising that you would be able to get it to work if you passed in a file stream, but it wouldn't work if you passed in a network stream because it can't rewind that one.
Why would that be surprising?
Because if I tested it with file stream, I'd think it would just generally work, and then I'd find out not an exception in the way I use my object, but it would just tell me that my JSON was corrupt if I then gave it a network stream. I have no way of seeing why it worked or didn't work. Just that it says the data is corrupt or not.
And
what says the data is corrupt?
If calling the stream overload with this flag set to true causes it to seek a seekable stream to where the end of the content was, so it can be called multiple times.
Right.
Then if I have the same data in a file stream or a network stream, in the file stream it succeeds, and in the network stream I just get a JSON content exception.
Well, it would be the second call with the network stream that you would get an error, not the first.
Right, but I wouldn't
you
understand the difference between I got bad JSON and I didn't use a seekable stream.
Right, but you're already taking the same stream that you gave and passing it to something else afterwards. So
I think Jeremy's point is that you could be prototyping an implementation that happens to work with file stream or memory stream, but then as soon as you switch that to network stream, things start to blow up, which isn't ideal.
Sure, but that's the case with any abstraction. You're talking to two different things; they behave differently.
It's easy. You just read it one byte at a time, or use pipe reader. No.
Anyway, I'm not saying not. I'm just saying that there's room for confusion. On
No, I mean this is one place. I mean this is to your joke at the end there, Stefan. Like this is the thing that pipe reader exists for. Like this is the thing that it does well. So if we wanted to make this work, if we had pipe reader based overloads, which I don't believe we do yet, we could
Not
make
yet.
one of those.
Yeah, pipe
This
writer
is how
overloads
to do
stuff.
that. I mean, I think it's reasonable. I think the question is what should we do, right? I mean, to some extent, you're opting into this behavior, and it seems to me the serializer behavior might be the one that has more fine print of like if you use it with a stream, effectively it means you're ignoring trailing data, and that's basically the behavior that you're getting.
Yep.
But yeah, that I mean, again, I don't have any objections to that. I just wanted to understand what the behavior is that we're giving people.
Yeah, I guess I don't know why we wouldn't. If we can easily just say if the difference we're talking about is basically saying if stream dot can seek, then seek to a position. I don't know why we wouldn't do that. The argument is basically, well, it turns something that will that will deterministically fail into something that will non-deterministically fail.
Yeah, it also wouldn't deterministically fail because if you decide to wrap a stream with a stream that only ever returns 1 from read,
right, then it would work.
Then it would always work. So, I was thinking of that along the way. It's like, all right, the answer is if it's a non-seekable stream, all bets are off. But if it's a seekable stream, it'll work, and it's probably fine.
I think it'd be nice if we can make it work, and then someone can choose to use it with memory stream if they want to, or we can just document, hey, if it's seekable, we'll try and seek.
Yep.
Assuming it's not super hard. Like if Eric goes off and Ivlis is like, oh, we have to track all this other stuff and it's going to be really, really hard, then fine, don't seek. But if it's really the question of do we add these 3 lines of code or not, we should add them.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely useful, right? I mean,
agree.
if you have a file that has a sequence of objects, it would be nice if it just works, right? I think to some extent I'm also okay with the behavior because ultimately there's nothing JSON specific about it. It's just the way streams work, right? Because you fundamentally get a buffer, and then if you have a file format that has to parse the buffer,
right.
If you can't seek, well, then you have zero way of basically controlling where you end reading, right? So that's just the...
And
domain.
if and when, I'm assuming if not in .NET 9, in .NET 10, we'll add deserialize overloads that take a pipe reader, just like we added, I think, serialize overloads that take a pipe writer, or maybe just serialize async.
We might even have approved these APIs, but I don't recall if we did add those for the serialize async enumerable specifically. I think we might have, though.
And I would assume those would always only advance up to the end of the object.
Right, yeah. I mean, they would not consume more than they needed.
Right.
Anyway, so I think that's a segue into the second part of this proposal, which is, because of the aforementioned issues with the using stream, we want to expose a dedicated API that lets us kind of stream multiple objects from payloads like that, from stream payloads like that. And we already have functionality that sort of replicates this. It's called deserialize async enumerable. Now, the issue with that streaming implementation in particular is that it requires that the payload has the shape of a root level JSON array. So it kind of deserializes the individual elements of that. So the idea here being is, what if we extended that functionality with, for example, an enum that specifies a deserialization mode, or if people don't find that particularly savory, we could use an alternative method group. What if we kind of change the modality so that it did the same thing, but each element is effectively a root level value? And as it stands, the proposal says, what if we have an enum, the name can be improved, I think, but what if we have an enum that specifies the modality, whether it's the current behavior array, root level arrays, or whether we want to support root level values, with the possibility of us extending this in the future as well, because there are more modalities to be explored here. And an additional couple of overloads that that accept this enum as an additional parameter.
That
And
makes sense to me. I mean, my question would be, if we have this API, why would we want the other behavior of JSON serializer deserialize?
I think both are useful for their own ways. Like, I think the idea of, oh, there's some junk at the end of my payload, please ignore that. I think that would be useful. Now, for the low level UTF-8 JSON reader, kind of that is the building block for everything else. So, it needs to exist.
Yeah, I think the reader is fine because it's well behaved. I think it's similar to the IASing enumerable, right? It's just that the JSON serializer, like, it's not that it's not well behaved, it's just that the behavior is a lot more nuanced than
with the stream overloads.
Yeah, people probably realize the first time they use it. Versus with the deserialized one, with the deserialized async one, it's like, well, you just get multiple objects, and then as long as you keep pulling it, you will get them. I think the big problem is we don't really have any sort of link methods for IASing enumerable, right? You can't really write single or first, right? So you have to do that manually. But yeah.
Do we not have synchronous versions of those?
I mean,
we don't.
I don't think so. I mean, I think we had an extension method that turns an IASing enumerable into an IEnumerable, right? Don't we?
Yeah,
that one seems not the one you want.
I could see someone wanting like an IEnumerable version of this, right? Maybe. I don't know. I guess it doesn't really matter, but you could imagine several JSON objects in memory or something.
I mean, we already have sync overloads for stream, like the deserialized async variants. We also have deserialized overloads. We could conceivably do the same thing for this case, although the name would probably need to be something new, presumably deserialized enumerable. I don't know.
Or, I mean, today, right, like with the API you just proposed, you could use like a JSON reader with the allow extra data and just call it repeatedly. Like, it's not as convenient. I don't know.
Yeah. I was mainly just seeing if we missed edits in the proposal. So.
Yeah.
Any objections on the shape of the enum?
Not that we should add another modality right now, but you said there would be more. Can you speculate on what one of them might be?
Yeah, sure. So the one specific I have in mind, and customers have expressed desire to have this added in the future, but basically the ability to zoom into a specific array within an arbitrary complex JSON document, and you tell the deserializer, oh, just stream that, ignore everything else, and that would be an overload that additionally accepts a JSON path parameter, which points to the entry point for the array to be streamed. We actually need a JSON path primitive to support that, or we could just have users pass a dumb string. But it's not something we're shipping for 9, that's for sure.
Right. Well, I mean, if that mode requires more data, then it wouldn't really be a new mode. It would be a new overload because you'd need to pass that data.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of if this is a new method group name or if this is actually an enum. So like what's a thing that would need no additional data that would still make sense here?
I really think it's an overload. Maybe it's a question of whether it should just be a Boolean, but because of the reason that you mentioned, like if you need to specify an added argument, it's another argument.
I mean, maybe it might be a dumb question, but if you only have 2 modes right now, why can't we key that off of the JSON serializer options if you say allow trailing? then you get the root level values behavior.
It becomes awkward because, as you know, the JSON serializer options is your caching context. So if you need to like create an entire new cache just to like support a different deserialization shape, that it's doable, but it's awkward. It kind of tells users to not follow the best practices that we require them to do.
But it would be more like you want, I mean, you could basically say allow trailing content true in the one you're caching, and you're saying now I want to do deserialize async, but I only want to support an array. I don't want to support root level values, right? So you would, it seems like almost like, why would you want to do that? Like, why wouldn't be okay with just getting multiple objects so long the type matches?
Oh, you mean kind of pick something dynamically?
Well, I mean, if you call deserialize async enumerable of t, you have to specify a t that we deserialize into, right? So if you use root level values, you fundamentally have they all have to have the same type, basically, right? Otherwise, stuff doesn't work. It can't be strings and then numbers and then an arbitrary object and then a string again, right? That doesn't deserialize, right?
It can be like if your element type is object, then
exactly. So you would have to specify the common type, which is either object at that point or something else. And so I was just asking, like, if you'd now say, the JSON options that I specify, I say allow trailing content true, and now we call deserialize async. Well, now we put you into root level values. Why would I want to go back to array?
Well,
what
because
would I gain by that?
Because that setting might have been provided at an unrelated context, like in your composition root in your application, and you might just be getting your options through DI. You like whether a flag that governs the behavior of UTF-8 JSON reader like that. I don't think that should have any bearing on how the JSON data is being interpreted, if that makes sense.
Right, but you still rely on this being true if you want root level. So you can't specify root level values.
Actually, for that particular overload, no. So for that particular overload, it will create a new reader, and it will set it to allow trailing content equals true.
Oh, okay. Now I understand what you're saying. I thought before you basically said, okay, you have to set this to true anyway if you want root level value. I see.
If I
Gotcha.
Yeah, I said that, then I was mistaken. Now, the thing is, there is a fourth use case that's coming up. Like I mentioned, root level values, root level arrays, JSON path, and we had another AI-related use case that was described to us, that is being able to stream very large strings. So suppose that you're reading a payload from an LLM, for example, and it is producing a very large string. And we would want for your client-side intelligent application to behave like in a good way, as in kind of return the tokens as they come in. You would want to be able to stream back that singular JSON string. Currently, there's no support for that, like in any layer of SDJ. But at some point, we probably are adding this, probably .NET 10, who knows. But when that happens, I'm sure that we will need to bake in another modality that says, take this JSON path, that JSON path happens, expect a JSON string there, and just stream back, individual string segments of, the thing that's being served back to you. At the moment, customers need to create custom schemas where effectively they create individual string token objects, but if they don't control the shape of the API, then they're effectively host. They need to wait for the entire thing to come back and materialize it as a gigantic string. So my expectation is that this deserialize async enumerable method is it's going to be a complicated beast, and the mode enum might be better modeled as a discriminated union, even assuming that we did have access to discriminated unions. But in lieu of that, and this just came up now, maybe we need a bespoke options struct, which would in the future be able to accept a JSON path property and would be able to accept an additional flag controlling whether we're streaming an array or whether we're streaming a string, or whether we want to stream something different, even like, I don't know, big integers. I don't think we should ever do that, but I'm just kind of exploring kind of the space of potential things that could be streamed in this context.
I mean, I would agree with you at that point. You want a custom options type. The only thing I'd say is I would want one, not three.
Yes.
So we should have then one shape that works for both the source generator as well as the dynamic version of it.
Absolutely.
I have to be honest with the streaming we talked about for JSON documents. I don't know enough, but it's just naively I was thinking, why would we not change the protocol? Like if you want to stream data from the server, why would the reader have to handle tokens that are larger? Because just from a pragmatic standpoint, if I want my language service or whatever you want to call the thing that uses the LLM be used by multiple clients, JavaScript libraries and others, now everybody has to somehow figure out how to stream ginormous portion of a JSON document. Why would I not have kind of an API that would stream basically the protocol, like at the protocol layer, you get individual JSON documents that represent that, because that seems like so much easier to implement because it doesn't require like changes in the JSON stack, right? But anyway, if that's the path we're taking, then I guess you would have to have some very different API shape for those that doesn't really fit what we're doing here. So like at that point, it almost doesn't matter what we do for this API. We could say we do a Boolean here, we do an enum here, because it seems that this other thing would look very differently.
I mean, at this point, I've sort of convinced myself that what we do need is I don't know, JSON deserialize async enumerable options struct, which for the moment would be exposing a single Boolean property that controls whether we want to deserialize either array or root level values. Sorry, a Boolean flag that is called deserialize root level values that defaults to false.
Is that really necessary? Because I feel like once you say you want the other mode, would you really use the same options type? Because it seems like that API would be very, like it would have to look very differently in what it returns and what it accepts. So how would you, like if this API here takes this option type and now you configure this with a JSON path, how does this API handle that? Like, do you know what I mean? Like it seems like at that point you're saying, yeah, we use the same options type, but some options only work for certain methods.
You create ad hoc instances per call site, I think is the answer. I mean, we can just go down the conventional route and add a bunch of more overloads. That's fine as well.
Well, maybe I'm misunderstanding what that would look like. Like in my head, I just don't know whether it will be something we can use these APIs for. But it sounds like you're saying if we have an options type we can extend, then no, that's what we would do.
Yeah.
If that's the path, then yeah, I'm totally on board with what you're proposing.
Yeah, we know for a fact that this will be extended at some point.
Right. But I mean, in the JSON example for the LLM, where you say there's one long string I wanna stream, there's other data in that payload that you still want to return somehow, right? Or no?
In this case, you would be discarding that data.
So then you're basically saying the only thing you get back is an async removal of string, I guess, and then everything else is dropped on the floor?
Yeah, you're zooming into a very specific part of the document, and you're streaming that. And the reason for that is that there's no real way in which you could both stream and read additional data without writing a bespoke deserialization implementation. Like if people have this need, they fall back to doing their manual UTF-8 JSON reader code with manual buffer management.
Yeah, so easy.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing you're describing there to me doesn't sound like it would be deserialized async enumerable. You're not deserializing anything. You're just reading a streaming string.
Uh,
You can make an async enumerable
Fair.
thing, but it's not this. And as
It
you
is
just said, it only
one.
works for string.
It is
So
one type of deserialization.
I mean, it's just read.
I mean,
like
I mean,
it's,
it really isn't. I mean, if you really squint, it really isn't much different from saying you have a very long array and you incrementally deserialize it as an enumerable, right? In that sense, I think strings and arrays are kind of similar enough that
well, just like if this enum was already a well-named options type, and we were saying that we could add this thing as an options type, it would be an options type that if you put it in that mode, it will throw if t is not string. At which point, why wasn't it just a dedicated method?
sure.
That was much more clear on this is when you want to call me instead of like I have this function called do stuff, and if you call do stuff with parameter 7 set to 5, then it does this stuff. It's like
I mean, will say that from my perspective, I still regard this as deserialization. It might be doing something trivial, but it is deserializing in the sense that it's mapping from an encode.
But it's not going to use your serializer options. It's not going to use your type infos. It's not like it's just reading a string. So
I mean, sure, but like the example that we also have here is like you could imagine the array behavior in the same way. So the array is not a top level array. The array is somewhere deep in the document, and you're providing the JSON path and say, stream this array inside the document, right? In which case, you're still deserializing. It's still
right.
But the array in this case is arbitrary. The array element rather.
He mentioned the first extra mode he mentioned was an array that wasn't the root that you want to do the async streaming of its elements. And I get that one. You still have to specify the T. It's using all of these other options. I just think this invented mode of I'm going to send you a long string slowly and you should manifest the fragments as a string or system.string, that's not... That's like JSON reader.slow read. So.
I get that it doesn't compose well with the fact that this method is generic. That is true. One possibility is that we can, in this case, if the user explicitly specify string as the T and the path happens to be a JSON string, it might automatically fall back to doing this string streaming mode. But I think that's a possibility, but until we get to the point where we start designing on this space, I'm not sure if that's the right path.
But yeah, I mean, so like we can say we want this to take an options type, but I don't think it's respectful of anybody's time for us to design it here. So I think we're saying no to this part, or rather, it needs more work to the second part.
Okay.
Because you'll need to design the options type. You'll need to make sure it is sensible for the two modes that you already have, which means it's probably like if it's just a Boolean, you've got to name the Boolean. You got to make sure that you theoretically think that it would actually work to extend it for these other things in the future. And I think that given how many issues are backlogged for this release, we should not be doing design by committee right now.
Should we just put the Boolean in then?
Got to name it.
Okay. Deserialize root level values.
And you want to put that where the enum currently is?
Yep.
That seems okay, and it may be a thing that when the options type comes on we regret later, but it can defer. It can rewrite itself in terms of the options.
And then basically the behavior of the existing one is that being false. Logically, they're calling the other one with false. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm okay with that. I guess I still think it would be easier if we wouldn't have had the Boolean. We would just say use allow trailing content true, but I understand the desire to make that orthogonal to the options.
All right. What was your proposed name?
deserialize root level values.
So if you were calling stream comma options, now you want the new thing, you'd say stream comma true comma options.
So if you say true here, what happens if I call it with, let's say, async enumerable of int, and there is an array with a bunch of ints, and
Exception.
then okay, that immediately is an exception because you don't match the type. Okay.
And there's a reason for that. Like there is ambiguity. Like you can't assume that you can infer the shape based on the JSON because the element type might be an array itself. So that creates ambiguity as to what an empty array represents.
Gotcha. So there's basically no flattening, right? It's just you have to match these individual things. Yeah. Okay. That makes it easy.
So there's no rules against like shoving a new overload parameter in the middle of the parameter list. Like I've certainly done it before, but I always feel like a little picky.
It's being added as the last formal parameter.
Last formal. I see. Last equals. And sorry if I missed this, Eric, but like earlier you were saying when you proposed the enum that you envisioned more scenarios than array and root level.
But I think following this discussion, like we decided that it's the required information for the different modalities is going to be richer than just specifying different enum cases. There will need to be JSON path parameters, etc. So we kind of went we looked at the potential over-engineering route of creating a bespoke options, but at the end we just went with a simple Boolean, and if need be, we'll add new overloads in the future.
Yeah.
Seems good.
Steven, you're cool with that too?
Is it written down somewhere where I can, like, Jeremy, can you paste the...
No, it was on screen, then I moved it over to type notes.
If it's false, it behaves as it does today. If it's true, it's the same as was intended with the enum's top-level objects setting.
Yep.
Yeah. My hesitation is just setting it to true. Like my initial reaction would be that it's an and rather than an or, that I'm also deserializing root level values rather than only deserializing root level values. Like if I had a top level list of arrays, would true be deserial? Like would I get a list of all the elements of all the arrays, or would I be getting a list of all the arrays? And I believe the answer is I'd be getting a list of the arrays if it's true. And if it was false, it would blow up.
Yep.
And that's fine. I'm just wondering if the name appropriately conveys that.
Would it be scenario breaking if instead of adding these new overloads, we added a new option, which was like allow root level async enumerable items? I mean, name to be determined, right? But where it would be like, okay, it works the same way it does today, even if you do set that to true, in that it allows explicit array, but it would also allow root level.
Hell no, because if you get to modify the options, you just set allow trailing content. I think the whole point was you don't want to modify the options because the options are where caching happens. So you just want to reuse the options as they are and then pass an additional method information that says allow that.
But what I'm saying is, if it's allow, right, like those are options you can conceivably use anywhere. It requires deserialize to be like a little smarter, right, and be like, oh well, I can accept either.
That's what I was
But
asking earlier, but Eric basically said
Wait,
maybe, but maybe not.
does specifying true for this Boolean mean you don't have to specify allow trailing content true?
Correct.
How would that work?
Because he's constructing his own reader,
Oh, right.
and and he sets it there.
Yeah.
But if you do find any trailing content that isn't readable as a top level item, like that's still an error, right?
If it's
So,
false. If you set it to true, then the enumeration would end.
If you set it to true, it will try to read everything in the stream and interpret it as a JSON document. If that isn't the case, it would fail deserialization.
Yeah.
If you're creating a JSON serializer options with allow trailing content equals to true, but then you specify a deserialize async enumerable either with the original overload or deserialize root level value set to false, it would stream the first thing provided that it is a JSON array, and it would be ignoring anything that comes after that.
Right. Like logically, it makes sense, right? Because if you say allow trailing true, there might still be cases where you say, I want to stream an array, right? In which case, like, how would you do that? Now you would have to specify, you have to basically clone the options, which means you lose all the caching, just to set it to false for this one call.
Well, without thinking more about it, and I would naively expect that if I had allowed trailing true, and I sent down 10 top-level objects, and then there was garbage, I would expect the enumeration to end before the garbage.
That's right, yes. But it would require the first item in the list of top-level values to be an array.
right.
I'm
So
saying-
not a top level value.
Right,
Like,
so I'm
yeah,
saying
you know
I
the end
would-
of the array.
I would expect naively, and I can understand there's reasons why this wouldn't be the case, but I would understand naively that if I did send down 10 top-level objects and then garbage, that the enumeration would just end at the garbage because I'd set allow trailing content to true.
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, no, that isn't the case, unfortunately.
Like, I think that's okay, but yeah, it does make that part of the options meaningless for when you have deserialized root level values true. Um,
I mean, the other
mean-
option you have is basically treat the existing method as, I mean, we didn't name it as such, but you could basically say it means deserialize array async enumerable, and then you would add a new method group that is basically say deserialize top level values enumerable, right, which has the other behavior.
Perhaps the root of this confusion is that maybe allow trailing content is a misnomer in the sense that it is trying to read beyond the end of an object, but if you reach the point where you find something and that something isn't JSON, well, it isn't allowed, you get an exception. So maybe rephrasing that property name somewhat might clarify things.
do you have any suggestions for what would be clear?
So JSON.NET calls this support multiple content, I believe.
Sorry, so for JSON reader, so the lowest level,
Yeah.
is it when it has hit the end of scope 0? Previously, it was if you find anything other than white space throw.
Yeah.
And so presumably it's now that's going to be keyed off of this, but it's not going to look at that content and see if it was another valid JSON value, right? Like it could
No.
be a completely invalid, like the letter Q would never be, yeah. So
Yeah.
like the letter Q, JSON reader will say whatever, it was trailing content, that's fine. JSON serializer for a single object will say that was trailing content, that's fine. It's only this JSON serializer deserialized multi thing that is now all of a sudden it's trying to interpret that as more JSON.
Yeah.
So I think that
But
allow trailing content makes sense in the low level things. It's just it gets weird when it composes higher.
Sorry, maybe I'm missing this, but my understanding was that the reader would still throw for invalid JSON. Would it not?
Not if it's in the bonus content zone.
assuming that you advance it to the point where it actually tries to parse the trailing content, then it will throw. But if you don't, that is fine as well.
So it's not that
That's the
read
name.
returns. So it's not that read would return false, as in I'm at the end. It would, like if you keep reading it, then it would say, sorry, this is not JSON anymore, right? So in that sense, it does behave exactly the same as the deserialized async enumerable, in the sense that if you read to the end, it will definitely choke on invalid JSON.
I guess that's
It's-
a reasonable explanation. you
Yeah.
know.
But the JSON reader would read the null here. And then if you set allow trailing content to true, it will then return true, I'm done.
Well, the reader doesn't have a built-in loop, right? Like that's the difference. And like, how
Yeah,
do you
you
know when
pull,
to end the
right?
loop?
So if you keep pulling on it, it will then, when you start trying to read the quit, it says, sorry, this is not JSON, right? I mean, if you stop reading, sure, but like,
Now there's a point where it tells you you're done. It tells
Well,
you
I mean-
you've terminated scope 0. Stop asking
it
questions.
basically means you have finished the first value, but because allow trading content basically is multiple values, well, then the next value starts, right? So if you now you can keep pulling on it, which you couldn't do before.
Does it?
Now you can, and now it will throw and say, sorry, this is no longer JSON.
Will it?
Yeah, we could treat
Does
a
it start
kind of
reading
rule, like-
again? Can you keep
Well, then if
asking
you
it
scroll
questions, or
up,
did you
right?
need to make a new one?
No, you just keep reading it, right? That's basically what he's doing there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, this is such.
I'd loaded the model that like it was done after the word null. It's like I didn't throw, but I'm done. And there's no like
so
you can ask me more questions.
Operationally, what happens with your example? You start with your fresh untouched reader object. JSON token type is none, and you call reader.read. It returns true in this case. And in which with the original mode, you would do like a while reader.read, and as soon as it returned false, that indicated that you kind of exited the first object. This is no longer the case with this mode. It will return true as you read the null, and then you can perform another read, and in that case, it will throw, assuming that you have something like quit, which isn't valid JSON.
Yeah.
So to be very clear, my setting for allow trailing content on the UTF-8 JSON reader changes the return value of reader.read
Correct.
from false to true, like once you've reached the end of an object. Okay.
So how do you know you reached the end of the object?
Current depth.
Okay, so with the name allow trailing content, my expectation is when current depth is 0 and it hits the closed curly, or you didn't have a thing with state, and it finishes, the reader is now dead. It is said it's the same as if it's read to the end. It says I've hit the end of content, I'm done. The only thing that it did was not throw because it saw more stuff there, and then you'd have to make a new reader at the next state. If it's turning it into a streaming mode, then that's not allow trailing content.
Well, the
It
reader
sounds
already
like-
doesn't throw, to be clear, right? Like the reader, if you like knew not to call read again by the time you got to the right place, like implicitly, like you'd be fine, right? Like at that level of the API, it wouldn't throw.
I mean, I think that's a weird way to look at it, because fundamentally the reader API is a pull-based API, right? And the contract is you pull so long read returns true, right? So that means you somehow parse the content. What the difference here is you're basically saying I allow multiple values. I don't just expect it to end after the first value, right?
Yeah.
Which is
If it was allow
pretty much the
multiple values,
JSON.NET.
allow multiple values, I would understand. Allow trailing content means don't have an error if you see something after the JSON.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, and that's why I think renaming that might make more sense. And then you, like, assuming we want that behavior, but I have a hard time relating to why we would want the behavior that you're describing, where we would basically say, yeah, we allow content, and now the reader is basically done. You have to construct a new reader. That doesn't seem desirable to me.
Okay, then I think we
Well,
just need to rename the
wait.
property.
Yeah.
Okay, to be really clear, Eric, am I correct today that like if you don't read too far with the JSON reader, it effectively already allows trailing content at that level, right?
No,
No? Okay.
today it will read to the end of the buffer and make sure that there isn't any non-white space content.
I see. So you would have to, at the very least, like somehow parse and slice it or figure out how to slice it ahead of time.
Which is
Yeah.
a big, huge usability issue, by the way, because
Right.
you know, we have tons of customers that need to pre-parse JSON just to be able to kind of deserialize individual components in a payload.
So
So
just a quick question on that part. So if I today, because the JSON serializer loop around the UTF-8 JSON reader, right? It's continually reading buffer, passing it to the reader, reading a buffer, passing it to the reader. So if it reads a buffer, passes it to the reader, and the reader comes back today on the very last byte of the buffer that's supplied and says, done, I'm good, we're done. Does the serializer not try and read another buffer to pass it in, at which point the UTF-8 reader fails?
So unless the buffer that is being passed into the latest UTF-8 JSON reader instance isn't marked as being the final block, that has implications as to the result of the read operation. So if you're materialized, so the model in which async visualization in general works with UTF-8 JSON reader is that you give it a buffer and you give it a reader state, and you additionally pass a flag indicating whether this is kind of the final chunk that you're supposed to read. So if it isn't the final chunk and you kind of reach something that looks like the end of data, it will return false, indicating that more data is needed. So it will kind of unwind the stack, go back, read more stuff from the stream, and repopulate with a fresh JSON reader, keeping the original state.
And the serializer won't pass in is final true until it reads 0 bytes from the underlying stream?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I think the scenario you're describing, Eric, where you want to incrementally parse, presumably with the new API, you could do that. At that point, you would just have to know when to stop pulling on it.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is basically you're saying, you know, that's what the current depth tells you.
Because yeah, so my expectation with it named allow trailing content is it would read, and then when it returned whatever the I'm done signal is, that it would have consumed the 4 letters of null and the space, and it would have said this was the JSON root level object. I'm done. There was crap after it, but I don't care because you told me to not care. And
I mean, it depends on how you craft the loop, how you pull on this.
No. I'm saying with this property, with the property named allow trailing content, my expectation is it would be the same as it is today, except instead of reading this far and throwing, it would say I read this far and successfully exited.
Yep.
So you don't want to overload the meaning of returning false from read, though. Like that's the big thing, right? Like I think the reason it works this way is read should only return false if like getting more data could help it, right? Like if it isn't that kind of it. Like otherwise, like either like today, if you have the default of allow trailing content false, it makes sure that you have like you finished your object and you have the 0 read, right? But then after this, right, like you still only want to return false if you could use more data, but you might know that you're done reading.
The return value of read is already overloaded, and its meaning depends on whether you're on the final block. So if you're not on the final block, a false means that you need to get more data. But if it returns false in the final block, then it means that you're done.
And today it means that you're done and there's no trailing content, right? So it means you're done. Like it means that like feeding more data isn't going to change anything. Like that's the invariant. Like And that's what I feel like don't want to change, right? Like if this ever returns false, there should never be a world in which like, well, maybe if you feed it more data, it will do something. And like I think what we're trying to avoid is like having the JSON reader return true or false based on whether or not something is valid JSON, right? Like that's just something it doesn't have to do today, right? It either throws or doesn't throw. Like it's just
Right. So in my example here, this would read it, return true, and then you'd call read again, and it would throw that quit is not valid JSON.
okay, yeah. But that's allowing trailing content, especially in a world where like previously you couldn't read the null at all, right? Unless you trimmed.
Right.
So like I feel like
But
even if it throws,
again,
that's
if it's gonna try to read through the quit, I don't think that's trailing content. That's
multiple.
multiple root level values.
maybe, but it doesn't have to be valid JSON, right? It's not just for like, especially at the JSON reader level, like it's not just for root level content. Like it might be someone put some sort of metadata at the end of their JSON file or something. Like I don't know.
I think what I'm getting from this feedback is that allowing something that isn't JSON is incidental of the fact that you're pulling on this reader. But I guess allow should reflect what the behavior should be, should you decide to read to the end. And in that case, perhaps, like if we regard it as that, then maybe allow trailing content isn't fit for purpose. Like allow multiple root level values, that's a mouthful, but maybe it does a better job at describing what this thing is doing.
Yeah. I think if it's going to keep reading, then allow multiple root level values or multiple root level values or.
What about allow trailing values?
Because the problem is if you say trailing to me is what means it's not going to keep reading. Because what you've said is there's stuff at the end and leave it alone. It's a trailer. It's not yours.
So the hangup I have with this is that like today, right, it sounds like JSON reader basically does read trailing content, like whether you want it to or not, right? Like it just does, like as you try to read like the final close token of your object or whatever. And like now it's like, yes, you could read the trailing content manually. You may or may not. So like I feel like allow, whereas before it just made the decision for you. It kind of makes sense to me. Like before, it always read trailing content and would lead to errors. Now it will let you, but you don't have to. Maybe you could be allow not reading trailing content.
Yeah, I like that one. It's concise.
Allow multiple values.
Yeah, I mean, technically a JSON document contains multiple JSON values nested within it, but I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
So like wasn't one of the motivating scenarios for this showing like garbage non-JSON? Sorry, I'm trying to like open the issue again. Like at the end of a JSON document that you're just like reading and you're definitely not reading multiple values.
It's one of the motivations. It isn't the key motivating use case, though. Like the key motivating use case is that you're reading from a payload that has multiple white space separated JSON documents. That's kind of the main thing.
Because calling it multiple value read, like, just the way my brain would interpret that, if this is the payload, it reads the null, which is just a stand-in for any JSON object. And then, according to Eric, the way that you know that you've finished a root level object is you're supposed to look at reader.currentDepth, and you see read succeeded and current depth has gone to 0. That means I just finished reading this first value. Cool. Hey reader, how far did you read? Because what's left, which is now this, I need to send to some secondary parser. And then, like, great. So you can do it now, whereas you couldn't do it. So you'd have to be in multiple value read mode to do it. Just don't read the later values yet. So it works for me for this. If this was a weird thing that was a JSON value followed by a command verb. So.
For what it's worth, there's an allow trailing commas property in the same struct. So this is basically just following that naming convention. And share that.
All right, we've lost Emo.
Permanently or temporarily? Like he went to a different meeting, or he's?
Yeah, he said he was gonna.
I think he left.
Drop for the second half, and we just passed into the second half. So.
Got it.
So, Mr. Tobe, how do you feel about multiple values versus the proposed trailing content?
Same meaning, different name.
So you're okay with either?
No, I'm confirming. Same meaning, different name. Like, no behavior changes in response.
The behavior that was written here.
Yeah.
Just renaming it to a name that.
Right.
At least in my opinion, more clearly.
And everything we talked about with the serialization, it all remains the same. So just a different name for the property, right?
Right.
I'm fine with it. If Eric's cool with it, with everything he knows about JSON, I'm fine with it.
So to be clear, with JSON serialize or options, now if I had in this example, JSON serializer dot deserializer int whatever 123.json, like that still succeeds and stuff because I said allow multiple values, even though there are not multiple values. But that's the change in behavior.
I mean, if people feel too badly about this, we could just kill the flag on the JSON serializer options level. Like if people think that this is going to create confusion with respect to how streams are being advanced and with respect to like the meaning of the flag, we could just remove that. We actually don't fundamentally need it for the use case that funds this.
That's a good point, actually. If you get rid of it from JSON serializer options and it's only a reader thing, the option at the serializer level is basically you're calling deserialize async enumerable with a flag there.
Yeah.
We can always add it in the future if we wanted to allow control for something else, because it effectively he specified false or true for deserialized root level values or whatever we name that thing. It doesn't depend on allow multiple values being set, and setting allow multiple values with that flag ends up resulting in strange. Well, I was gonna say it's resulting in strange behavior, but the fundamental reason you would want it on JSON serializer options is if you actually did want to deserialize first value of multiple top-level objects, in which case you could achieve that by calling deserialize async enumerable and calling move next once.
Yep, and if you're synchronous, you could just build the reader and have it, and the deserializer, I assume, is only going to pump the reader once if it's in allow multiple values mode. Where by pump it once, I mean get back to scope or get back to depth 0.
And so we are losing the ability to synchronously deserialize with stuff after the first object
from a stream.
Yes.
Yeah.
Debug assert result or get next async is completed. Not debug assert, because then you don't call get next. But
Yep, that was my first professional software mistake. Calling a useful function in an assert.
It is strange though having JSON serializer options allow multiple values when 99% of the APIs you can pass it to can't support multiple values.
right, in 99% of the APIs, the only use would be to basically allow garbage at the end, which
Right.
is which is not what it sounds like allow multiple values is doing. So yeah, I feel better about it at the lower level.
We could always
Is that
add
it?
something else at the higher level in the future if we wanted to.
Yeah, and probably name it something else as well.
I think the name at the lower level makes sense. That's exactly what it's doing. It changes the behavior when you hit the end of the first object to allow you to keep going. So that makes sense. I think the value at the JSON serialized level is a bit dubious, and we probably want to call it something else, so better to leave it off for now. And for deserialized async enumerable, I think having a Boolean flag is fine. It's a wordy flag. But other than name, I think that's fine.
What about root values as elements? Still wordy, but
do we call them do we have any word for top level or root level things elsewhere in the API? Do we call them root or top, or what do we call them there?
Presumably the exception text from JSON reader says you can't have content after a top level or root level or
Another thing we could do is instead of calling it deserialize async enumerable, maybe we say async enumerable implies like that it's in a JSON array and it's like an enumerable object, and now we're going to have deserialize multiple values that also returns async enumerability.
You mean instead of having a flag, have a method group like the serialize top level async or whatever.
Or deserialize multiple values, maybe, or deserialize root level values.
I mean,
level values.
deserialize multi-async.
Yeah, if we had called the deserialize array async, that would have been better. But
yeah, it's like I'm kind of contorting my understanding of async enumerable to kind of imply JSON array, but yeah, though it obviously doesn't necessarily, but today it does.
Or, if we feel like spelling out multiple.
I mean, I think it still should be the same method group because fundamentally it is operationally the same thing, but interpreting the data differently.
It's the explaining the data difference in a param doc versus in a method doc.
I think they're like different enough that like most people are going to be doing one or the other, not both. The other thing I almost suggested, but this seems less sound, is that like if the first token is an open array, like automatically switch to level values and see what happens. You know what I mean? Like, like
content sniffing is the source of 80% of security bugs. So
right, yeah,
don't
which
content
is
sniff.
why that was like I almost suggested.
Yeah.
That was
I mean, so if we go with
brainstorming.
deserialize multiple async, then that means that we can also just go with deserialize multiple, and then that returns IEnumerable. And
I mean, isn't the existing method deserializing multiple things? I don't see how that differentiates.
It's a question of whether they're wrapped in an array or not. That's
Yeah.
the only difference.
It's really deserializing one thing, but a part at a time, whereas this is deserializing multiple things.
I don't know. I mean, to me, it's strip off the closing and ending braces or brackets, and then it's the same API. So it's like, are you?
No commas either, right? But and also like, well, will this allow commas actually between the top level values?
Just white space, I guess. Yeah.
Only
Just
white space. Yeah.
Yeah, and that seems fair.
I mean, I'm sure. Sorry, I'm sure that there will be some request at some point asking for arbitrary separators, but that's going to be a different implementation because it's going to need like different handling of the readers. So I'm not including that at this point.
If we did that, so question for you, Eric, if we did that though, how would we want to expose that? Like implementation wise, I understand there's complication, but API wise, presumably it would be an overload of the same method, but with some additional arguments.
Yeah, I think it would be transparent to the user. So I think that's another point in favor of some kind of options type being added in the future as we expand the capabilities of this thing.
So that's the thing though, right? Like as soon as it becomes like an overload on a thing that doesn't need like top level multi-value options, like creating a new options type for like an existing method group is weird. Like the fact that we're considering like having, allowed separators that's specific to this mode of deserialize async enumerable makes me think it is pretty different. And furthermore, I don't think anyone who's calling the existing overload is going to call the new one or vice versa. Like you probably picked one way to do it. You either want top level values or you want to stuff it in a JSON array, and you probably won't use the other one.
yeah, like the existing one adding a JSON path option of like where in the document are you looking, like to be this array, give me one element at a time, makes sense as an overload. Way more than the like, there's a JSON path on a thing, and depending on what properties you set, we may or may not read it. And like an options type that has itself modes and sub properties that don't matter depending on what mode you're in, like those are really hard to use, right? I honestly prefer it as a different method group, but
I think it would be difficult to differentiate a new method group from the pretty nondescript deserialize async enumerable that we ended up picking. I think for better or for worse, that's kind of our streaming functionality. That's the name of our streaming API.
I think we can come up with another name. Like, has there been so much buy-in in deserialize async enumerable that, like, I feel like this new one will probably end up being more popular, like the more common API. So, like, I don't know, give it a new method group where you can have options that are specific to like deserializing multiple top-level things.
So Eric, you're thinking that in .NET 9 we ship it with the Boolean, and in .NET 11 or whatever, there's a new type where we add new overloads of deserialized async enumerable.
Yeah.
And replace the Boolean with a struct or a class or something.
Yeah, I think so. Because like there's many ways in which you can stream a JSON document, fundamentally. Another one that just came up is, I'm sure somebody will come up asking for async enumerable byte array of base 64 strings, for example. I mean, would we do that? Probably not, but it just kind of speaks to how many things we could bolt on top of this thing, depending on demand.
That I'd hope we'd suggest we instead do as some kind of, provide a text reader to stream, or a string to stream thing, like, that expose the base 64 or base 64 URL decoding as something that produces a stream that's then fed into this.
Yeah.
All right, I can buy that. The options thing in the future, or the custom struct in the future, and then it's just the Boolean, and I don't have a better name than deserialize level values, other than deserialize seems duplicative, so maybe it could just be bool top level values or something like that. I don't know.
Top level values are the elements.
I mean,
top level values as elements.
I mean, I think
We don't need to make it longer. I mean, I think either top level values or root level values if we're going to do the bool.
yeah, and I mean the documentation would just say true means it reads multiple values from the top level scope, and false means it reads the first value as if it's an array and returns its elements.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I can buy that.
Yeah, my vote, I think, is still for the new method group, but it seems like I'm getting overruled. And I guess if there is a scenario where we think that there will be streaming options that are kind of shared between both method groups,
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we're
it
voting,
becomes more appealing.
we're at 2 and 2 and at a deadlock, but
We got to give weight to the feature.
but I'm
owner.
at
But yeah,
we've spent 90 minutes on this, and
Yeah, I'd be in favor of a top level method group if we had called this something else, but because it's just deserialized async enumerable, I think we keep on keeping on and just add more overloads of that same method group, because that is what it is.
because once something's bad, may as well make it worse.
It's not bad, and you want something not perfect,
Sunk
might
cost
as well
fallacy.
keep it not perfect.
So
Sure.
we're sticking to top level instead of root level in our nomenclature, I take it.
Do you have any name? Like, have we used either name anywhere?
I mean, except
In
for
JSON.
comments documentation, I've used root, but that's kind of the first thing that came to mind. I can change that too.
I mean, if our API docs or our concept docs call it consistently root or top, then whichever one they're calling it, we should use here.
There is no consistency, so top is shorter, so
Does the RFC mention either root or top?
I mean, from the RFC's perspective, what we're discussing here is invalid because a JSON document is a JSON document. There's no such thing as trailing content.
Sure, but it could say, it could have said at the root level, blah 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 blah. But I don't see the word root or top in the RFC.
We could also like call it like is array or something, right? And default it to true. Like the thing is, you want to use the word require, but it implies that the thing is, like, it's hard to indicate that it's mutually exclusive.
I think we would want to keep the array as the default. So
Right.
like you would need to opt in to top level values, and that's for two reasons. One, it's kind of you're deserializing valid JSON, first of all, and secondly, we anticipate that in the future you will be zooming into nested arrays via the JSON path overload. So I think that opting into a top level value setting is preferable because of that.
Yeah,
And we would disallow the JSON path with the top level values, right? Like that would just be really weird.
that would throw, I presume.
Yeah.
Can you name the array mode? And this has to be one of the unfortunate APIs where the default behavior is true, and if you want the other mode, you pass false. I mean, many of our bool, because we name it bool keep open instead of bool close. But yeah, like, could you name the array one better? Sounds like top level values it is.
Yeah, I think like array mode equals true is probably the best you could go that way. I think top level values is probably a little better. And we don't use root anywhere in all of our JSON APIs or top.
So JSON document probably has a property called root element, and that's going to be because it's based off of XML's notions of things. So if we are looking for any relevant area nomenclature, JSON document called it root.
I guess one issue maybe with calling it root level elements is that people might think, or root level values, is that it's like in the root element. I don't know. Top level values seems fine.
Yeah, JSON document dot root element.
We use root in a bunch of places, but it's all internal implementation, so I wouldn't worry too much about that.
Yeah, in this case, I think there's really no association with JSON document.root element, so like using root for that reason wouldn't be like helpful.
JSON node has root. Yeah, it's not a strong signal in any case.
Yeah. Is the JSON node universe ever supposed to be enlightened into this multiple values concept? Because
to the extent that you specify JSON node as your T.
Because if so, what would JSON node dot root return?
No, I think a DOM should only be representing a single JSON document. So I don't think it intersects with this world at all.
Okay. Because I think part of that would say if JSON node was going to invent a synthetic root to be the implied array, and then that would mean that root and top were not the same thing. So, all right, top level values it is.
So in a hypothetical future where we're introducing streaming options or something, like the kind of place that we would put allowed separator characters to let you put like commas between your objects, would that go as like sub options on JSON serializer options, or would it be yet new overloads?
No, I think it would just be a struct that you specify at the call site.
It would replace this boolean as in a new overload of the same method, I think.
Yeah,
I see. So it would take its position. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be defining any caches, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah. That wasn't, but no, it's good to know. I was more thinking about it from like a usability perspective and like, but yeah. All right, and it will default to false, right?
It doesn't default. You just call the other one.
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah, the existing overloads would be calling into that with top level values equals false.
Right.
Actually, that is an interesting point. No,
What's
we don't want
interesting
to.
about it?
we don't want to default this because we want to replace it with the options later. We could make this a default parameter and do the default moving pattern, but I think this is fine as a formal parameter.
Yeah, and it would still be a compilation breaking change, right? If you, I mean, you'd have to keep the old overloads still, but I guess you could add the default. Yeah, okay, I
Right.
see.
You would be this gets a default, and the old thing gets all its defaults removed and gets added or browsable never.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
the defaults moving pattern or whatever we called it somewhere. But I think it's fine as a formal parameter overload, and then maybe we just edit or browsable never it when we add the options in the future.
Awesome.
That small comment belies how much time we spent on that issue.
Thank you. Feel free to skip the other JSON one.
Alright, so back to our oldest, since we can't talk about the hybrid cache today, is add split support for read-only span of char similar to string. I thought we did this.
We've done this multiple times. And every time we've done it, we've punted it back for one reason or another, and it's been going on now for 6 years. So I'd like this to be the last time we review it and to ship it in .NET 9, because the implementation is trivial and everyone ends up writing their own, and we should just do it. I think the only question now is naming. So obviously we'll spend another 2 hours on it, but this is very simple. It's basically the enumerable version of string.split, except for spans and for t's instead of chars. And what I proposed in this latest iteration, which is like the 7th iteration or something, is that we're basically just doing what we did in .NET 8 for memory extensions .split, where except instead of writing into a buffer, we're returning an enumerable. So we handled the cases where it's a fixed length with the buffer destination ones, and these will handle the rest of them where it's basically just enumerate through them. Effectively, it's the index of and then yield range, index of, yield range loop. So it should be fairly explanatory what they do. In the existing .NET 8 APIs we added, we had split and split any, where split takes a single separator and split any takes multiple possible separators. So this does the same thing. The separators could be either a single thing or a set of things. So you could say split with a character, or you could say split with a read-only span of char, basically a string to act as the separator. I call out the only thing that doesn't support is the sort of the fourth case, which I listed as optional here, which is you want to split on multiple separators that are each multiple things. And we don't have a good representation for that. So if we wanted to do that, we could do it specifically for chars and strings and basically have that optional overload there, which is split any that takes a span of string. I see very few people using that, so I'd be fine not having it, but we could add it if we want to. Yeah, that's basically it. I've marked the any ones as params since we can now do that. What else? Oh, there's a naming discussion about what to call it. I had chose split and split any because that's what we call the existing overloads and memory extensions. We added a very similar API in .NET 9 to regex, and we called it enumerate splits because it already has an enumerate matches method. So we made it kind of match that, no pun intended. So there was a suggestion here to call it enumerate splits, which we could do. I'm fine with that, but I don't know what that would mean for the split any version. I don't know how to name that one if we called the other one enumerate splits. I'm done talking.
All right, so this is taking. So it looks like what we previously did was split any that takes a span of range for destination.
Yes. So that those are basically when you have at most a fixed number of splits and you want to write them into a destination. These are for an unknown or unbounded number of splits. So you can't just pass in a destination. You want to enumerate through them.
Right. I'm just looking. So calling it split means we have split and split of t, and which is fine because you're not going to call it in that style. And then the current splits are only for char.
I actually hadn't realized that, but okay.
So just looking here, I got the split and split innies are all just char.
Yeah. I hadn't comprehended that we'd only done it for char, but that's fine.
And so,
I mean, honestly, that is the 99% use case. Char and byte.
yep.
I mean, is there a reason to do char and byte over making it generic?
No, which is why I made it generic. I honestly, when I initially wrote, if you go back through the edit history for my edits, I initially said, oh, let's just do char. And then I went back and looked at usage, like, oh, actually, we kind of need ones for byte. Okay, we'll do T.
I mean,
Yeah,
you can tell it's evolved because everything else got updated to say span except the name of the struct.
Yeah.
So, which got pointed out in chat. But chat, you'll also notice that he did rename it as the return type. So,
I feel like the fact that the split returns something that's enumerable is isn't that normal? Like it normally returns like an array or something. So like calling it enumerate splits doesn't seem that helpful. Wouldn't it? The interesting part is that it's like ranges and I guess allocation free, which hopefully it is with span. But
It is, yeah.
so like split.
oh right,
into
okay.
ranges.
So this isn't returning an enumerator that gives back spans. This is only giving back the ranges. Because I was going to ask what's our story for memory, but
Right. That's our story. It's doing the same thing that we've done in similar places where we return a range and you slice.
Yep. Yeah. Chat suggests split any, if we go with the enumerate, would be enumerate splits of any. So add an of between splits and any.
Is the issue with enumerating over spans like scoping the value? Like, what was the memory issue you were talking about, Jeremy?
So
like if this returns spans instead of ranges.
If this struct was decorated in such a way that it returned the span representing the split value, then we would need to make 4 of these: memory, read-only memory, span, and read-only span. By returning range, this one thing can work for all of them because they can all be indexed with range.
I see. Like it's mostly so if you started with memory, you're not like stuck with a span that you can't like put
Right,
back on the heap or
because we
something.
previously rejected the proposal of given a memory and a span, give me the memory that represents the same slice as the span.
Right. Okay.
You can do it with overlaps, and it's like 5 lines of code, and I've had to write it, and that's why I pushed the proposal forward, and it didn't pass. It's the only reason I remember we did it. It's personal bias. So I don't know if this needs to be a ref struct with its current shape.
It does to hold the span so that when you call move next on it, it can do the next thing.
Oh, because this is the do what I say, not what I do of where we say don't make a type be both the enumerator and the enumerable, but we do it with all of ours.
I mean, either way, they would need to be ref struct because you need to be able to move next on the enumerator to get the next thing, and
I
to
guess
do
it's
that,
true.
you need to be holding the span.
All right, yeah. So it had the enumerator, or the enumerable piece of it would have to hold the span, and I guess the enumerator would have to hold
They
it too.
both would have
Yeah,
to hold it.
because it needs to know where it is in the span. Okay. I mean, technically, it could just hold. No, because it need to hold something that can hold a span. All right, yeah. It could hold a
Why don't
GC
we need
handle.
the is the generic constraint on I-equatable no longer necessary? I just was looking at the older proposal.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask, how can we call index of that? Like, span.index of, does it not have a constraint?
We probably need the constraint as well, or drop the constraint, or not use the path that has a constraint. I'm fine with any of those. We have a separate issue tracking removing the constraint, and then just you can use a quality compare of t.default. But we could. I'm fine if we want to add the constraint here, as and then this revisit this just as part of revisiting all of them. Again, the 99% use case here is for char and byte, where they satisfy the constraint.
Okay, so
I would not. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So these two, like, if we're saying should match the constraint of index of, these two seem like they're easy to match index of. Sorry, t separator and params t separators seem like they're easy with I equatable / using index of. This one seems less clear that I equatable is the right constraint.
Yeah, I mean, as an implementation detail for char and byte, it would, we could do the right thing for arbitrary t's. We would probably index of separator sub 0 and then effectively sequence equal. And I believe sequence equal is either unconstrained or it has the appropriate constraint on it.
Okay, so we would still be I equatable of t because index of is I equatable of t.
I think so. I don't think there's any reason to have if we're going to add the constraint to the first one, I think we would want to add it to the second one as well.
Okay, that was really just I don't know how this is written and if it made sense, but. Alright, so do we want to go with split and split any, or enumerate splits and enumerate splits of any?
I don't like enumerate. Split normally returns something that you can enumerate, so I don't see what that adds.
Okay, there was a while, like there's a middle period, which by calling it middle, I guess I'm implying we're maybe past it, that we were using enumerate in places to say, I'm not pre-allocating the return. I'm giving it to you as I get the data, versus like get foo is the pre-allocate. Partially that was in places that we had we had get directories, and then we couldn't call get directories returning an IEnumerable, so now we have enumerate directories, and it's like, don't call get, call enumerate, because it's just better. And
I see.
So there are naming can go either way on it.
And with regex and .NET 7, we'd already had regex.match. So when we wanted the enumerate span API, we called it enumerate matches, just because we needed something to sort of differentiate it. And then when we added the split one, we called it enumerate splits, just to kind of keep in that style. But I don't think we need to hold to that here. I think it's fine to just have these be overloads of split, because a lot of the uses if you look at the uses for string.split today, they're for each string s in whatever .split, and they're being used for enumeration. So I don't really care either way. I think it's fine either way.
Yeah, like I now understand the reasoning more, so thank you for that. But given that there is no span of T dot split already,
Right.
I would vote still again.
yes.
Splits is funny too. Is a plural word. I feel.
Yeah. So do they both convey the same semantic interpretation to the caller? And if yes, then we can go with shorter name.
I think there's both a pro and a con, and that is, if you already have for each whatever in string.split, then to switch to the span version to make it non-allocating, you're going to do .as span. But now the return that the element type has changed, so then you'll go in and modify the element type from string to range and then fix that up in the body.
Right.
So is the naming difference helpful or hurtful in highlighting those sort of knock-on changes?
If that was the reasoning for changing the name, I would want to put range somewhere in the name and not enumerate. Because like the reason this becomes different isn't because it's not allocating. It's because it returns a range.
I put range in it somewhere.
If we
Putting
didn't
at the
go
beginning.
with, sorry,
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I think if you would put range anywhere, it would fit best at the beginning because it also would work well with range split any.
Range split will looks a little bit weird to me. I mean, like, if I see it like this, I will think that like it will just return one range for me. I mean, it's not indicating like it's enumerable or something like this for me at least. But a split by itself, I mean, like if I compare it to the string, it match. I mean, like it will return like enumerable things. Enumerate splits also is okay to me, but range split, it's kind of like not clear to me.
On second thought, like split ranges or split any ranges isn't the worst, but my preference is still split and split any.
I think we should just go with split and split any. So go ahead, Tanner.
I also prefer split and split any.
Yeah.
If we were to do anything different, I think it would need to be very verbose, and it would make it harder for people to find and understand. Whereas here, I think they can just understand we're doing a split. We're still giving you the information you need. You just have to do the slice yourself too, because it's a ref struct.
Yeah, to be super clear, it would have to be like find splits as ranges or something like that. But yeah.
Get ranges for split.
Yeah, basically.
Then you can search your fruit span for a banana and get a banana split.
So basically that.
Yeah, this
if you used to be splitting on, you're doing the reg multi read thing, you're splitting on null characters, and you want to move that to the span enumerable one. So I think that's the transformation you would have to do.
Yeah, I might write it slightly differently, but effectively, yeah.
You'd write like as span or two span.
I would have written, yeah, I would have deleted line 29. I would have written line 30 as .as span .split, and I would have written line 32 as string .as span range.
Fair enough. I was just like, oh, and if I do multi SC of right, nope, that's a string. Like I wrote the analyzer that tells you you're doing a bad thing here. So, yeah, fair enough.
But it's the same thing. It's the same idea. Yeah, and then multi-SE span becomes multi-SE. But yeah.
So just one question about split any. I mean, like, of course, I mean, like, this is going to work as ordinal comparison for the strings. Do we think we will need one for linguistic or not?
We don't.
It's I can see the scenario, but I don't see
Yeah.
demand on it.
I mean, most of what we have for spans today is non-linguistic.
It's ordinal, yes.
Yeah. I could imagine, I mean, before we even got there, I could imagine wanting like ordinal ignore case. And the moment we did that, we would be making char specific versions. So I think if that became important, I think we would probably be adding a split, you know, or a split any that was for char and that also took a string comparison, and then it would implicitly also be able to support string comparison dot current culture.
Yeah, I was talking about split any on. I mean, like,
Well, same idea.
yeah,
Oh, you mean the one that's listed as optional?
split. Yeah, split any is already returning enumerable of char.
Well,
right?
one of them is line 13 is not line 10, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, line 13 was me basically saying this rounds things out if we felt it was really necessary. It's the only one that we can't do in terms of T. They said we don't have a good way of doing it because we can't have a span of span.
Right.
Can't we now?
No.
Okay.
It's you're referring to the allows ref struct stuff,
Yeah.
but that's still a gap. You still can't have span of span.
Okay.
I think that's fine. I mean, like, we can watch about, like, if we get any demand on it, we can produce those. Yeah.
I mean, if it was a concern, I'd be inclined to just not have line 13 now and add it in the future. Because again, I mean the scenarios. I've very rarely seen a scenario where someone wants to split on multiple strings. It's usually either simpler than that, like it's one thing, or it's multiple single things, or it's regex and it's a very complicated split, which could include, you know, an alternation of multiple strings.
But do you think of any problem if we just expose this from now?
It just makes the implementation more complicated. That's all. Because they're all sharing this was one of Levi's initial, like, make sure you're thinking this through. They're all sharing a single enumerator type, and so that enumerator type needs to be able to accommodate all of these.
There was a question from Miha of, would we consider a separate iterator type per method to avoid per iteration overhead in the iterator implementation to pick the right index of helper, which I didn't understand because it's going to be based on the T, not the method you call. But
I think so. I addressed this briefly, and Levi had a whole comment about it. I don't think it's worthwhile. We're talking basically about a branch per. So there's two costs here. There's the cost to store the state in the enumerator for all the overloads that it might go to, and there's a cost per move next to basically switch between which of the how you're interpreting that state, which of these things you want to do, and I personally don't think it's worthwhile having n enumerators for n of these APIs, because I don't think those costs, the memory cost is going to be, you're not allocating these things, they're not going on the heap, so we're just talking about possibly a copy and stack space.
And like a predictable branch, right?
Yeah, and then the branch should be very predictable, but even if it wasn't, the cost of that branch compared to the cost of searching through the span and yielding stuff out and whatnot. I don't think it's the dominant cost. But
Well, I mean, so is that saying specialize it for char and byte, etc.? Not like
no, it's saying
the 8
each
would
of
be
line 8, 9, 10, and 13 get their own return type, so that when you call move next on that return type, it doesn't have to figure out, did I come from line 8, 9, 10, or 13 to know what to do next.
Gotcha.
I'd be inclined to just keep it simple and
Yep.
just have this one. And if we're really concerned, not have line 13. And then if we chose to add it in the future, we could always add that one with its own dedicated return type. Because it adds more. Not a huge more, but more.
Chat has also asked, do you need... I think it'd be split any. Search values.
We could do it, but we don't already have that for other things. I think I'd prefer to do it at a point when we were adding it for everything. Also, again, I'm sure there are outliers here, but the vast majority of cases I've seen for this are the things you're splitting on are relatively few things. Search values would help for greater than 3 or 5. But even then, the most common case I would expect would be something like white space. But if you're doing that, you probably are going to be doing a more complicated regex-like search, because you're not going to want to split /r/n. You're going to want to do that as one thing, probably. Although maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe if you're going to, in your loop, if you're going to ignore empty ranges, maybe you would just have an extra iteration for every /r/n.
Yeah, do we... that's actually an interesting point. Do we need the enumerator options overloads?
I don't. So my argument was no. There's 2 values there. There's trim entries and there's remove empty entries. And from my perspective, they both exist because the string.split API returns an array. And so if you want to be able to to not have empty entries, or you want to avoid an allocation for each string that might have had white space around it, you want to tell the implementation to produce the right thing from the get-go. Like, you don't want it to allocate a larger array than possible. You don't want to have to reallocate each string in order to trim it. But here we're dealing with the enumerator can handle empty entries by just the very first line can be, continue, and can loop around again to just go back, and it's not allocating anymore. There's no array that's larger. And for trimming, it can just do the trimming on the span, and it's not allocating a brand new string. So I don't think either of them is necessary, and they're both also only really relevant for chars. So they don't really make sense with T. In particular, trimming doesn't really make sense with T.
That's fair. So you're saying that the iterator will return empty ranges.
Yeah, if you had 2 separators right back to back, you're going to get back a range that's empty.
Right. So you're a CSV that doesn't support quoting CSV, and you have 50 commas in a row. You're going to move next 49 times, or 50, or whatever the right answer is, and then each time, if you look at range.start, you'll see that it moved, but range.getLength will tell you 0.
Because it's really just a question of, does that loop happen inside of split, or does it happen in the consuming for each?
I'm fine with giving the data back to the people.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure that we're
Yeah.
understanding what they would do.
I think the one interesting aspect there is there's probably cases where you have this kind of applies more to tensors and ML, where you have the concept of sparse data for non-character data sets. So for imagine you have a bunch of floats, you want to skip anything that's nan. That could become potentially costly for such scenarios, because now you have to iterate a bunch of empty things instead of the enumerator just skipping them itself, which would be much more efficient. And the downside is that we couldn't go and expose there's I don't think there's really a downside there, rather, because we can just expose some kind of split entry split enumerate options later. I don't think we can reuse string split options though.
Right. Not
And we
without
couldn't
time
just
chart.
yeah, and we can't pass in bool because bool would conflict with the params read-only span of bool separators for bool. But we could expose some kind of split options enum in the future, and so I don't think it's blocking if it becomes important.
Yeah, I agree. It's not blocking. I don't. I mean, the simple implementation that I'm assuming we'll go with is basically going to be, index of separator return range, and whether we put a while loop around that, or whether there's a while loop around the struct, move next method that does that. I don't know that the cost would actually be significantly different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if this is returning the raw data, which you would want if you were a CSV reader, so with the empties, because you need to know that you've moved on to a new column. Anybody who doesn't want to see the empties, that's a trivial wrapper.
Well, actually, I guess we could make it significantly more performant if we had the option, because the normal one we're going to do index of, and we're basically going to say get the index of the next item that we're going to split on. Whereas for the other version, we'd instead do index of any. We'd basically find the first one, and then we'd say, and then from there we'd say index of any, or index of any other than the entry that we're wanting to split on, and that allows us to then skip everything and find the next relevant portion. So you could do more efficient things there, but I still don't think it's important. I think it's fine.
I didn't follow, but okay.
I think it's, if you do, going back to the CSV thing because people can picture it, if you're looking for commas and you have skip empty, you find a comma, or you find a comma and the next thing is a comma, so now you say index of any except comma, jump to there, and that'll be when the next thing happens.
Oh, is that what you were saying, Tyler?
Yeah, basically.
So that it could be more optimal inside the loop because it can avoid returning.
But that falls apart if it's combined with trim empty entries, though.
If we're being the string one, yeah.
Then you would need to do index of any except any possible white space or comma.
Yeah.
In that example.
So so if we're adding what now is on line 14, if we're adding this one, then I wonder if we do need the string split options, because it's obviously string at that point. Because I think the equivalent split any has it.
We could do it for consistency, but we don't need it for the same reasons. If the trim one the caller can do, and the skip empty entries the caller can do.
No, I just on this overload. Woohoo! That the existing memory extension split any that takes span of string for multi-value separators accepts the string split options. Of course, the problem is defaulted parameters and params don't play nicely. So it would end up with a different shape. So, yeah, I mean, we can put this one in if people want it for squaring the circle, then we can add it later.
I think we
Or we can just leave this one out, or whatever makes you
I think
happy.
we leave we leave the optional one out until.
Okay.
I mean, it's supported now via regex, even though it's more expensive. So with regex, you can create a separator that is all of your strings alternated together, and it'll basically do the same thing. Ironically, using search values. And for the search values thing, I would be fine in the future adding another overload of line 12 that takes the search values. I'd be fine doing it right now if we really believe it's useful.
I would say we can approve it right now, and you don't have to do it until you want to get around to it. But I don't know how our issue tracking works when you do 3/4 of an issue and then split the rest to another release. So.
We'd figure it out.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think saying right now that would be like, "Yep, this is totally the shape it would have."
That is the shape it would have.
Then
All right, sure.
Cool. Then now we just saved 10 minutes out of another meeting.
Great.
And we want equatable instead of none in using equality comparison dot default.
I was told that I should match index of.
Well, yeah,
I know that there's some that we've removed equatable on because it's caused problems with it being constrained, but I know we've also not been consistent on that.
Yeah, we've been consistently inconsistent. I would love it if I mean, there's an open issue to make more of memory extensions not constrained, or at least with an option to have that. I think, yeah.
If it was unconstrained, would it respect equatable if it was implemented, or
Yes.
would it just okay?
Yeah, that's what equality comparison default does, or equality compare t dot default does, and so that's why that's why list is unconstrained and why it uses it by default, because it properly follows equatable when it exists.
What is the advantage? Remind me, Tanner. What is the advantage of adding the constraint here? Like, why do we have it on index of?
There's none. I think we just did it because historically we've done it, but especially with the JIT optimizations around equality comparison and stuff, we should get all the right inlining and the right optimizations, and I don't think there's any benefit to this being equatable anymore, or any of our APIs for that
There's
matter.
probably a benefit for reference types.
No, we specifically optimize reference types in the JIT as well. For that, I'm pretty sure.
If it were a constraint, so I don't care about reference types here, but if it were constrained for reference types, then you could just do reference types dot equals, t dot equals. Without that, you need to do a quality compare t dot default. I still don't think we do a good job on devirtualization or around that. So I think we still store it into locals, and then we call compare. We have a virtual call on the comparer, and then that compares implementation does an interface call on the reference type. Does that sound right?
Well, no, that's why in dictionary and stuff we actually, for reference types, for the default comparer, we actually in the constructor we check if the comparer is the default if one is passed in. If it was, we actually set the default comparer to null. That way, we can just call equality compare t dot default directly.
We do that for value types.
Virtualization.
For reference types, we always initialize the comparer to equality t dot default.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna leave the shape without the constraints, and if we need them, then add them, and if we don't,
Yeah,
then
I think we leave them off. I think the case where the constraint is helpful is a vast minority case here.
Okay. I'm just slightly wondering how the implementation is going to work if it can't call index of.
Well, internally it can use index of that doesn't have a constraint on it. This is all in core loop.
Fair enough, because I see that index of calls span helpers index of, but source.net won't jump to that, so I can't.
Yeah, we
See
need to
if it's
revisit all
constrained.
those constraints in general, I think.
Yeah, it'd be nice to remove those constraints where possible and just have it work, because there's a lot of types that don't implement IEquatable that you might want to do equality comparisons on. Like reference types normally don't implement IEquatable.
Yeah. That it may be though that we at the same time we might also want to support a bunch of those APIs taking iEquality compare of T. So maybe we would add new overloads that take iEquality compare of T and those aren't constrained or something like that. And the compare could be optional.
Which would go here and whoops, your param, so back here and then out here.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't be params, but yeah.
No, it's because this one's params, the iEquatable would have to go to the left of the
Right,
separators, but on
would-
all
I
the
think-
rest it would go to the right.
I think for the API that took a compare, it wouldn't take a params.
Okay, so you non-params the separators, comma, the...
Yeah.
Fair enough. Alright. I think we've worked out all of the typos for 6 years of evolution on this thing, and that everything consistently says span split enumerator. Any issues, or is this finally going to happen?
Let's do it. Let's ship it. It's been way too long. And honestly, like, if we ship just line 10, that would be that is the vast majority use case. Now line 9.
Yeah. That wasn't just to throw you off.
Keep me on my toes.
That was, it didn't belong in the final message. Alright, making sure I didn't... the search values overload would need the iEquatable since search values T has it. I don't think that's true. If search values is more constrained in this method, I think it would work. Anyway, the answer is add the constraints if you need it. Also, the search values may not be being added this release.
Yeah, and the only search values you can create today are char, string, and the search values one is a little weird.
Yeah, I could feel like you could add the overload without the constraint as long as you weren't constructing a search value, but good luck creating a search value where it matters.
So you can have a search values. Snea's not on the call. You can have a search. So for char and byte, search values make sense. The only other thing you can create a search values of T for is search values of string. It's a little weird to be doing split any on a. Well, I guess it's fine.
But then you would have basically an array of strings, and you're splitting on when you find a string in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So, okay.
The more common use would be the same. We have dedicated APIs for index of any that take a search values of string with a read-only span of char, and you're searching for any of those strings within the larger string. That's not what's happening here. Here you're searching for any of these strings within a list of strings.
Right.
So if you actually wanted to do this, the same thing that we added search values of string with index of any for, we would need a dedicated overload for that. And this fourth overload doesn't provide that, which might be fine. It just doesn't fully handle the search values of string case as it was intended to.
Sorry, why doesn't it handle the search value of string case?
What are you searching within? Are you searching in a list of string, or are you
Yes.
searching in a string?
In a list of string, right?
Well, in a list of string, it's fine, but that's not what
Yeah.
search values of string. Like today, there's no index of any that allows you to search for multiple strings in a list of strings. You're searching for multiple substrings in a larger string. So it's index of any read-only span of char search value string.
I gotcha. All right.
So if you wanted to split, for that case, we don't provide an API here to do that. It would need to be a read-only span of char search values of string,
Right, which we can add later.
which we can add later.
This one's just the, if you are splitting on any white space because that totally makes sense in your context, then build up a search values of every Unicode white space character you feel like supporting and party on.
Right.
So, and again, you may or may not decide to implement it this release. We're just saying this is the shape it would have if we added it.
Got it.
Would we preemptively approve the other one, the read-only span of car search value string?
I think we cut bait.
All right, good. All right, we're done. See ya.
Womp.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And that leaves us with still a whole lot of red. And this week is a holiday in the US where most of us connect from, so we won't have quorum, so we won't be meeting. And so, yeah, I'll see the people who join us on the stream and the people who join us in the call, and see y'all next Tuesday, same .NET time, same .NET channel. Auf Wiedersehen, and for US people, happy 4th of July.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Oh, and I think today's Canada Day, so happy Canada Day, all you Canadians. All right, ciao.